The Canadian Federation of Students is in Ottawa this week, lobbying the federal government for tuition-free post-secondary education. Some of those students met with the Prime Minister yesterday, among them Charlotte Kiddell, who had already met Trudeau as part of last year's CBC News special Face-to-Face with the Prime Minister.
What are you going to do to ensure that my generation can have access to the same opportunity as yours, which is simply to graduate and find meaningful work and start a family?
Yeah, so we need to be as efficient as possible as making sure that young people do get a path towards meaningful employment.
It's been a year since that exchange, so has there been any progress on some of the Prime Minister's commitments to young people and specifically students? Joining me now is Charlotte Kiddell. She is the chairperson of the Canadian Federation of Students, Nova Scotia. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
And obviously familiar from your encounter, your first encounter, but not your last encounter with the Prime Minister. You had an assessment then of how the government was doing. It was very early on in terms of youth and student issues. Where would you say they are right now?
Well, my assessment immediately after meeting with the Prime Minister was that I was fairly disappointed by some of his answers. And I have to say, I'm still pretty disappointed by this pattern of broken promises and lack of bold solutions on youth and student issues. You know, of course, electoral reform is an example of that, but also I do distinctly remember asking the Prime Minister in our meeting if he planned to honor his commitment to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to fund Indigenous post-secondary education, and I recall him saying that was absolutely a priority and something his government would be working on quickly. And yet we've still to see that $50 million investment while 10,000 Indigenous students are waiting for access to education that is their inherent right.
What would you say, though, to people, and I'm sure the Prime Minister would say, hey, just been 1 year, one budget, give me a chance?
I think that's fair, but this $50 million I'm talking about, that was something that was a featured component of the Liberal election campaign. That's something that won him a lot of votes and something that he's been talking about for over a year now. So I would say it's beyond time to see that promise followed through on and that the Indigenous students who are waiting for access to their education can't afford any longer.
So you met with him this week.
I did.
I'm sure you brought this up.
I did.
Knowing you, and did he say, did he give you any signs maybe this budget there would be something there? What did he tell you about that?
There was no firm answer once again. He refused to confirm what was going to be in the upcoming budget. He did express some personal support for the cause, but didn't tie that to any commitment on political action. And, you know, I think at this point, Trudeau really can't afford to be separating his personal beliefs from his role as Prime Minister, not when he has the power and ability to make this education possible.
Although the Prime Ministers don't generally confirm what's in the budget or not.
Of course, of course. I think the fact is that we are asking him to confirm a commitment that he's been making for over a year now.
Okay, what about employment? Because that was a big issue for you as well. We did speak to the head of his Youth Employment Advisory Council. They just handed in a report. They had lots of good ideas to try and get young people, ready for the workforce, and then, it's in the workforce without this so-called job churn that Bill Morneau's talked about. How is that issue going, do you think?
I think that it was certainly a frustration for students and youth to hear earlier this year that this government thinks that precarious employment is just a new reality for my generation. And, youth employment or underemployment is a huge issue and one we could spend a whole show talking about. There's precarious work, of course, but also unpaid internships, minimum wage. And what makes that all more complicated is that when students are graduating with record levels of debt, that seriously affects what kind of choices they can make entering the workforce. And that's why we're on Parliament Hill this week talking about student debt and talking about eliminating tuition fees.
So what would be the thing that would help young people as they move into the workforce then, for all those things that you're talking about, whether it be the precarious work, the unpaid internships? What's the one action you guys would like to see on that?
Well, what we're calling on MPs and senators for this week is free education, is universal access. We're calling on the 150 MPs and senators with whom we're meeting to fully fund post-secondary institutions and eliminate tuition fees for all Canada's students.
Does that seem realistic to you?
It does. We've actually costed it out at about $10 billion between the federal and provincial governments, but that's a recommendation that's cost neutral with the funding reallocations we've put forth. And I recognize that we are asking for a significant investment, but I also recognize that this is an issue of fundamental change. The system of individual saving schemes upon which our government has been relying is just not working. My generation is the most indebted generation in Canada's history, and I think it's beyond time for our country to step up and join those countries all around the world who recognize that education is a right that must be accessed.
And how is that being received in a climate where the government is deeply in debt, much more than it had even promised, right? Well beyond the $10 billion that it had said it was going to be. So how is that request being received?
It's being received fairly well. There is support for our recommendations from folks across all political parties, and there are folks who still don't think that post-secondary education is a priority for this country. But I think it's important to recognize that it is truly a matter of priority more than budget. Our government is consistently able to make money available when there is a political priority, such as in the case of defense. And if Trudeau really wants to be our Minister for Youth, this could be his legacy. Free education could be his legacy, and his government, this could be the government, and he could be the Prime Minister to make education free in our country.
Okay, Shirley Kiddell, nice to see you again. Thank you.
Nice to see you
Appreciate
too.
You coming in. Thanks.